Okay, we're live.
Okay. We are going to go. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, so this one is just about JavaScript events. So it's basically going over all the different kinds of events that you can access through HTML and JavaScript to program just JavaScript things that go on, whether it be transitions, animations, or if it's like you can run code to verify things. So some of the most common HTML events I put on here. So on change, so like if you're doing a form and it changes once you hit submit, it can trigger JavaScript code, which from what I've read, that's really good for when you're wanting like validation to run on what's being submitted in the form. On click happens a lot when you click on an item. On mouse over, so it's when you're hovering over something sort of similar to the pseudocode in CSS of hover. In our program, I guess we won't have that a lot because it's not a computer-based thing, it's for the mobile. And then you have onload, so that's when an object is loaded, quite often when it's like the beginning screen. And from what I read, it's like verifying. You can run code to verify what kind of screen the person's accessing it from to make sure that the most optimized version of your website is being shown. So you can see if they're accessing you from a mobile, a desktop, or whatever, and make sure you're given the right information back to them. And then animation events. So there's animation end. So that's the end of a CSS animation. Animation iteration, and that'll kick off an event whenever the animation begins to repeat. An animation start is when an animation begins. So those are all based on the CSS animations. And then transition only has one that I found, and that was transition end. So if you were having something transition over a period of time and then you want to run specific code when that transition ends, you can use transition end. And then these that I think we'll use more because we're programming for the mobile device is the touch ones. So on touch cancel, I don't quite understand how that's different than on touch end because it says touch is canceled versus touch ends. So I'm not quite sure understanding yet what the difference between those two. And then on touch move. So whenever somebody's dragging a finger across a mobile screen, is there a code that you want to have running when that happens? And then on touch start. So is there something you want to have happen when somebody touches the screen? Like I know I've seen some things, especially more for like the iPad stuff, where like a button appears or a little circle appears under where you're touching. So that could be a touch begin thing if you want something to appear underneath where somebody's touching, I guess. And so these can be added straight into the HTML. So this is coding as if you're going straight into your HTML. So it's all in one document. So you name the element that you want to add the event to, what the event is, and then you put your JavaScript code. So on this one, the element is the button, the event is on click, and the JavaScript code would change the word click of the button to the word thanks. So that's all in one line. So you have a JavaScript and your HTML all there together. I mean, this one's pretty basic, but it's more common to have that JavaScript code call to a function that's outside, because more than what we saw on the previous screen, like really you're going to be writing a JavaScript function or code that's longer than 4 or 5 words. So that's better placed in with all of your other JavaScript code. And plus then it's easier to find where things are. It's more organized. So then you can just call the function. So on this one, the text that says click on this text would change to the word oops when you click on it. So that one has it at least separated out between the HTML and the JavaScript. So they're in two different places. The way that I saw these being done even more so than attaching directly just to one, because this still has code within, you have to have access to the HTML, and you still are in a way changing the HTML in this, even though all of your JavaScript isn't in it. In this one where you add an event listener, you don't touch the HTML at all. You can do this when you don't have access to editing the HTML. So this is all done within JavaScript. So the Java code is that you write the name of the element and then add event lister, and then you list in the parentheses the event that you want to have happen, and then whatever function you want to have done. And then you put in what they call a use capture. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So this one would just go in there and it's document get element by ID. We're getting a button. So the element we want is this button, and we're adding an event listener to it. And so whenever this button is clicked, it will display the date. So it's fairly simple. This is nice because in the previous forms, only one event could be added to an element. In this way, multiple events can be added to the same element, and they don't overwrite each other. And you can also use this to remove an event listener. So instead of add, you can remove it. So you can change how a CSS, the events respond and what kind of interactions you have without even touching your HTML. It makes it really clean because then your JavaScript code is all by itself and your HTML and CSS codes are all by themselves. So the use capture, I don't know if we've gone over this before, but when events happen, they talk about events bubbling or events capturing. So when an event bubbles, it starts with the innermost elements event, and that'll go off first. And then the next one will go off, and then the next one until you're at the outermost event. And so that's what bubbling is. It starts from the inside and grows out. Capturing, you start at the outermost element and you work your way in, each one running through its event as it gets to the most inner object. So with this code, the default is false, and that means that bubbling will happen. So in this sort of example that I put down here, so let's say you have a div with a paragraph inside of it, and both of them have click events on them. So you click on that paragraph. If you're bubbling, the paragraph's event will happen first, and then once you've resolved that event, then the div's event will happen next. So if you either leave the false off, have nothing after this display date word, just end it there, or you put false in, then it'll bubble. So it'll start at the paragraph and then go to the div. If you put true in there, sorry, my phone is really loud. If you put true in there, then it will start at the div and have the div's event happen first, and then go in to the paragraph. So the only time you really need to worry about this is if you want to put true in there to make sure the outside element gets addressed first before the inside element, if all of them have like the same kind of event on it, like this had, where the paragraph and the div both had a click event on them, and you clicked on the paragraph within the div. So both click events would happen. So that is what I have, and those are the tutorials that I used. What I really found helpful with this is in the W3 schools, their try-its. So like this is the one where it's separated out and you can do the time. I mean, I really like their try-its because I think they really help you understand it, and like that can help you understand the add event listener and walking through it. So really in the W3 schools, it does the same thing, adding the time in the 3 different ways. So this is the one where it's all in line with the HTML. It gets it done. This one is where we separate, we have a little bit in a call to JavaScript in the HTML, and then we have a function in a JavaScript, and it works. But I think from what I'm reading, the ideal one is this one, where you just leave your HTML alone. It is just there, and you do all of the event listening within your JavaScript. So then if you have to edit things, you know exactly where to go look if it's a bigger thing. But that's what I have for event listening.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I really like W3 schools. I'm going to use them in my presentation too. The try-its are super nice. Like even if you don't read it, you can usually go into the try-its and just kind of see what exactly is happening there.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
They're nice to help understand and walk through stuff.
Right. Okay, cool. And we're presenting into infinity. If I can, okay. No. There we go. I'm sorry, I'm like super, there we
You're
go.
fine.
That's what I'm looking for. Nope, that's not what I want. All right, we'll get started. So I'm going over the CSS transitions a little bit. And it's kind of interesting because from everything I've learned so far, like intuitively, I would think that a lot of these things would be done with JavaScript because these are like a lot of the things that make the page dynamic, which everything I've been taught so far says that's kind of like JavaScript's job. But this is these transitions and a lot of, I guess, the animations that we'll be looking at next week too are baked right into the CSS. So it's kind of neat. And I guess it works pretty well too, but having it baked in natively and not having to use JavaScript. So jump right in. And so this is it. That's pretty much the whole thing. There's kind of a lot that's involved in this syntax here, but if we just like this dot element, that's just if you just name an element or a class, that's just typical CSS right there. That's really nothing special. It doesn't really have to do with the transition itself. But the main line here, the transition line, is what you actually use to do the transition in the code. It just applies to the element on whatever element it is. But if we look into it, we have 4 like properties within transition. The first one is property, and that is exactly what property in CSS you're going to apply the transition to. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But the second one is the duration of how long the transition is going to last. So say if you're doing a fade in, You can mark it to 4 seconds, and it'd be a nice slow fade that will be 4 seconds in duration. Ease is pretty much the type of transition it is. So you can have ease in, ease out, ease in and out, fades. There's a whole bunch of them on there, but ease is pretty much the type of transition. And then delay is you can set a time for how long before the transition will take place. And so this is talking a little bit more about all of them. I want to take a moment to talk a little bit more about property, because this is really interesting, and I'll even touch on it further in the future slides. But these transitions in CSS can actually be applied to almost any other type of CSS property. So if we look in like the examples here, like you can transition the height, the width, the opacity, the background color, and we'll look at even a few other ones in the next slide. But you can apply transitions to almost everything, not quite everything, but almost every property in CSS. And then you choose a specific property. So if you want to say background color, say you have a div with white text on it and the white background color, you can make it so interactive, so when the user puts their mouse over that div, then it slowly fades to, say, like a blue color like this. And so you just change whatever property you would like. And then as a note, if you just want to apply it to everything in that div, you can use the word all for property. So I guess that's pretty nice. The second one is pretty intuitive. You can set it to 300 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, however you want the transition to last. And we'll look at the different types of eases in just a moment, but it pretty much goes over how the function is going to transition itself over time, pretty much what the transition is. At least that's my understanding of it. And then the last one is delay, and that's pretty intuitive as well. You just set a time for before the transition will take place. And then this line of code at the bottom of the slide here, that is pretty much like overall on how the CSS line would look. And that would work for every internet browser except Safari, because Apple just has to do everything a little bit differently. But, but I'll show you how to make it compatible with Safari as well. So what can we animate? Well, the answer to that is actually not even limited to these 6 things. We can animate literally almost everything in CSS. And that includes, but it's not limited to, font size, background color, width, left, opacity, and the different translational options. I have the opacity and the translation options in bold, because I was reading up on it and they said that those are the recommended ones that we animate. They're saying that like we really shouldn't use the other ones. Like you can, but it's kind of like a animate at your own risk sort of thing, because when you do anything outside of those 2, or depending on how you look at it, those 4, you just run, I guess, the risk of dropping below 60 frames a second in your animations. And so if you do use the other ones, just know that it's going to be a little bit more taxing, and you need to test it out sufficiently before you release it, I guess, because it's a lot more performance intensive. But opacity is very common, and then position, scale, and rotation are also very common. What can't we animate? Display, font families, positions. Typically those don't even really make sense why you'd want to. Like if you look at font family, it doesn't make sense that you would want to change the entire font family in there. And as like a transition. Like each individual character doesn't transition or animate well. So how to trigger the animation? You touched on it a little bit. It's not using the same technology that the JavaScript is, but it's using that pseudo class to hover over items. And then a second way to do it would, I haven't actually looked at the code on using it this way, but I was reading up on it. When I was reading up on it, they said that you can actually change the class of an object. And when you change the class would contain the animation in it. And so innately it doesn't have an animation, but when you interact with it, it will change the class, and then the transition would kick. Sorry, the transition would kick in.
That's sort of, I went back and changed and updated the slideshow that I posted for last week that I did, and it does that in it now. It uses JavaScript. So the transition is defined in the CSS, and it uses JavaScript to toggle the class ID, and whenever it gets toggled, it initiates the transition.
Oh, I see. I don't think I've seen it since you updated it.
No, I just did that today when I was reading on it, because it said to define everything within CSS and then trigger it with Java. So I updated that one, so they were completely separate like that.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that for sure. But yeah, apparently those are like the two main ways of triggering translations and animations. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna kind of look through a few of the things we have here on W3 Schools. So we have our code on the left, and let's just take a look at what it does first. And so you see it expanding over a different period of time in each direction. So if we look just at what it's doing, oh, come on, go back. So note how long it takes to expand the width versus the height, and you'll notice that the width is already done, and now the height's done. And so let's take a look here at our syntax, which is this line. So we have transition, and they're missing a few of the other traits because you don't inherently need those. It's just like the rest of CSS. It'll have defaults to them that essentially won't do anything. But this has the duration and the property that we want to edit. And so this is property. We're going to edit the width, and the duration is going to be for 2 seconds. And then we're also going to edit the height, and it's going to be for 4 seconds. So 1, 2, and that's done. 1, 2. And that's done. And this is the class that it's referencing. They're both going to 300 pixels versus the 100 that they start at. So taking a look at the next one. Now this is doing something similar, if I remember right. Oh wait, no. So this is, trying to keep my examples straight. Okay, so this is showing what it would look like with a delay. Don't get tripped up by the syntax here. You can put it all in one line, but this is just another way to do it. You can do transition dash delay, and I saw it both ways when I was looking it up, and it doesn't make too big of a difference. But you'll note that when I put my mouse over the red square, it'll wait 1 second, and then it will expand. So if we even up it, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes. So that is a few useful settings. Oh, and this is pretty much the same thing, I believe. Yeah, so this is the same thing, except it's all in one line. So it's kind of showing that difference between separating it out, and this is having it in one line. And there's also differences that we specify that we want the transition to be linear. And so this is the ease that I was talking about for. So the property is width, the duration is 2 seconds, the ease is 1, or the ease is linear. Sorry about that. And the hold that's put on it is 1 second. I can't remember the word, but you'll notice the transition is slightly different on this one. It doesn't like seem quite as nice. It's much more linear and robotic. I don't know exactly the word for it, but compared to this one, it kind of eases. It's slow. It speeds up at fast, and then it kind of slows down. Looks a little bit more natural. But the reason that it is like that is because we specified that it would be linear. And so specifying some of those different ones, like if we look here, this is the one we just did that's linear. These are the different eases that are available, and I think there's probably more, but these are the most common. So there's linear. This is just a regular ease, and you'll notice that it kind of slows down before it stops. Ease in. So it doesn't slow down when it stops, but it speeds up when it first starts. This one starts at speed but slows down at the end. And then this one speeds up and slows down. And so I think a lot of times this looks nice, but it also just depends on what you're doing. So yeah, those are some of the options that are available for your ease. But and so again, don't get tripped up by this syntax here of transition timing function. Timing function is just another word for ease. And so this is like the expanded way of doing it. I'm sure if you wanted to go transition and I actually don't know if this is going to work, but let's see. 1 second delay. What did I change? Div 1. Yeah, so it works the same. It's still linear. It's pretty much identical. This is just specifying the ease, and this you can do it all inline. I think that's pretty much everything I have for you. Do you have any questions for me?
My only curiosity, when it said without using custom libraries, what does it mean by custom libraries? That's what threw me off about these last three.
Yeah, so these are like baked right into CSS. This is just part of regular CSS. A lot of developers, like you can have a lot more powerful transitions and a lot more transitions, I guess, in general, with custom libraries. And so like custom libraries, like some of the most common ones are, or probably the most common one is jQuery. You might have heard of that. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's tons of them. Like they come in every way, shape, and form. I'm trying to think of some more. There's like Angular and...
So this is just saying just do it with just straight up like CSS.
Right. Yeah, like there are other options to do transitions like this, and a lot of times they're more powerful, but they're almost like, I don't want to say they're like cheating because I haven't used them personally, but they're more powerful and supposedly a little bit easier to use. But I don't really know the full advantages and disadvantages of them. But yeah, it's just saying use basic CSS instead of implementing like a full library of code that other people have written.
That was the hardest thing about
essentially...
doing the transitions in CSS with triggering it with JavaScript. Most of the tutorials I found used jQuery instead of JavaScript. And it was like, well, that doesn't help me. I can't read jQuery.
Yeah, I honestly haven't done very much with any of the libraries, but apparently, like once you can like use basic JavaScript, you understand JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, then you can start using like libraries like jQuery, and apparently that just makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. The code
Okay.
the code that I saw for jQuery is a whole lot simpler, and I guess it covers more than what I found with JavaScript. But oh
Yeah.
well.
And I think jQuery, like all of those custom libraries, they just have like thousands of lines of pre-written code, and you can just call their functions, and they'll
Mhm.
do awesome stuff because it's already written.
Well,
So
there was animation libraries that I found where
yeah,
you would just load the library and call the function, and the ball will bounce. You don't
yeah,
have to do anything else other than call ball bouncing. So
yeah.
that makes sense then.
I had in a previous course they did. There was like a really small library I used. There was only like one function that it really did, but it was really pretty cool. It took like the basic idea was like an HTML5 carousel of images. So like
Hmm.
on like the front page of web pages, how there's just like a whole carousel of images.
Yeah.
And so to use that, you make like an array and you put a whole bunch of images in it.
Hmm.
And so I uploaded about 30 images of an object, like of just this little figurine that I had, just slowly rotated a little bit each way. So it was like 30 different frames, but it made like together they made like a 360 degree, um, like a 300, it covered 360 degree of the angles on it. And I just ran one function in there, and it made it so either as you scroll or as you move your mouse, it'll rotate the object and make like a pseudo 3D model of it, as it just rotates through all those images like instantly. And it was like really super cool and easy to do.
Nice. That I mean, that's the fun stuff. Like when you can start using and understanding other people's code, like those libraries.
Yeah. And I think that's why they have us not really use those right now, is because they want us to understand the code behind it first.
Yeah. Well, in all my other classes, that was the thing, is you have to be able to understand the code before you put it on your page.
Right. And I
So,
think that's probably the smartest way to go about it.
yeah. Well, that all makes sense then. So, I guess this is week 6, and we have through week 10. So, we have 7, 8, 9, 10. 4 more weeks left to discuss this stuff. So, I guess we can do these last two, and then whoever wants to pick something to repeat, I guess we can pick something to repeat too.
Okay.
I think we
So
might also want to be coming up with ideas for our app. And I sort of think we might just have to plan on it being the three of us.
yeah, I figure so. I might
So,
not love it if David or Jared jump in, but for now we'll kind of tentatively plan on it being us three.
do you have any thoughts on an app idea?
I honestly haven't really given much thought to it yet. Um, so that is a group thing when we make the app.
Yes, we design the app together. It's a group app that we each add code to, and we make or break it together.
Okay. I'm not too sure. I can give some time thinking it over this week, see what we can implement all of these code topics in. But do you have any ideas or thoughts?
Well, initially he said that to steer away from like game-based stuff, but that like were you, were you there when he was, or did you hear him talk about stuff that's been successful in the past? Like
I don't remember now.
he said a lot of like list-based apps have been good for this. Like he's seen a lot of grocery store lists and shopping lists, and one that he found like the most cool was one guy was a steak clerk, I guess, and his team created an app that everybody that was in the different buildings could sign in and add the head count, and then the person sitting, the stake secretary sitting up on the stand could lean over and say, hey, we have 1,000 people in attendance at state conference this time.
Oh, wow.
So something like that. But I'm not quite sure. You know, it has to be something that everybody would like. I mean, I don't know. There's another one that he said that was really cool was animal spotting. So you could record when and where you've seen animals and then it'll share it. I don't know. I sort of want to ask more details about, I might go to his office hours tonight to get more details about what all we need to do and what really the app needs to be about.
Yeah, that'd probably be a good idea.
We're getting closer to that. Although turning in all these websites is sort of stressing me out right now. I need to understand that.
Yeah, we still got 4 weeks, 3 weeks until we have to have all of our fluencies done.
Yeah, but if I remember right, you can only do a check every other week or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you have 2 shots. I'm wanting to understand it more. Or maybe it doesn't end at week 10 that we can get our fluency checked.
Yeah.
Maybe we can continue through week 14 or 14 is the end of the semester. So I feel like up until last week it was like, okay, we'll give you bits of information and you'll understand it. And then last week I was dead to the world, and this week I get the email and it's like, okay, you should be turning in code. And I'm like, wait, crap. Yeah, I was dead to the world last week. I don't know what you're talking about. So
Yeah, I haven't turned any fluencies in yet. I'm gonna try to work on some this weekend and see if I can get some in this weekend. But
yeah, that's what I've been trying to do this week. But I wanted to talk to him about it to make sure I was on the right page, with what I'm doing and what I'm thinking needs to be done. Because like with the loops, I went through and I did examples of each kind of loop. Am I overkilling it, or is that really what he wants to show that we're fluent in it?
yeah,
So,
from what I understood, I think Alex was talking a little bit about it last week, I think. But he turned in a website for fluency that seemed pretty comprehensive, and I think we got him I can't remember exactly what it was. It was like a very good or something like that, but it was like the second highest grade. It sounded like essentially like a B.
yeah.
So I think to get like full credit on the fluency, I think it has to be pretty comprehensive like that and pretty robust.
That's what I'm thinking. And so this is going to take a lot of time. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. We'll just have to pick what we're doing next week, and then we'll start repeating.
Yeah.
So.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.